Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Budi Sudarto. My pronouns are they and them, and I am excited to be here with you today. Before I share my story, here in Australia, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we're calling from. So I'm calling from the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I would like to pay my respect to the elders, past and present. Thank you again for inviting me to be part of the Her Summit program. It is such a great program, and I am looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have after I share a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Budi, and I am the founder and the director of a company, Ananda Training and Consultancy. And I often got asked by people, what makes you want to establish your own agency or your own company? And being a queer person of color, I I wish I had a nice story to tell why this company started, but it started from my own experience of experiencing multiple discrimination based on my sexuality, my gender identity and expression, as well as my race, ethnicity, and my faith. I used to work in an organization, and it wasn't until I left the organization that I realized my experience in that place was very much as a result of the intersections between multiple marginalized identities. And all of us here who are crossing that intersections, all of us know how it feels like to be made powerless, to be ignored, to be silenced, and to be devalued by the system that privilege and continue to put white and whiteness at the front. After experiencing all of that, and with my work in the community, I'm quite active in multicultural and multi-faith LGBTQIA plus communities here in Melbourne, in Melbourne. Also, with my education background, my study in sociology, that's when I started thinking that I can use all of this knowledge and all the skills that I have gained throughout the years to actually start influencing change in an organization. And that's when I started thinking about creating my own agency. And that's where Ananda Training and Consultancy um, emerged. The name itself, Ananda, is actually paying homage to my mother. My mother is still alive. And when she was active, when she was in that productive age, whatever we call it, she had her own company, her own health service, and it's called Ananda Clinic. So when I was thinking about a name to use, and I remember that, when I was young, I used to do some summer job there at the clinic and at the pharmacy. So I just kind of rang her up and said, "Hey, mom, thinking about starting my own company. Can I use the name?" And she said yes. So Ananda Training and Consultancy actually has a very, very deep, meaningful personal connections and meaning to me. And when I started marketing myself or my service for introducing the company to other people, the first question that they usually ask me was, why do you choose the name? Because the name seems foreign and the name is not an Anglo name. And for me, there was a deliberate decision. My industry is in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And there is no better way to start introducing diversity than to have a company name that is actually a non-Anglo name. And that's to make people realize that in an Anglo society, in a white-centric society, people of color, we have been told to assimilate. There is very little integration, or there's very little cultural exchange. It's just simply been told, if you want to survive, then you have to be white. So it's a little bit of an activism from my part to choose a company name that is actually not an English name, but also to keep my name, Budi. Again, when I first arrived in Australia, people ask me if I'm going to change my name, if I'm going to make it a little bit more Anglo-friendly or Anglicisize my name. And I keep saying to people, no, that's my name. If you don't know how to pronounce it, you can ask me. If you refuse to pronounce it, then that's part of the problem. So the company has a very, very strong social cause. It has a very strong social justice principles embedded in the way we operate and in the way we do our work. Again, as a small company that is owned by a queer person of color, we would like to invest to the community as much as we try to maintain financial sustainability. This can be a little bit difficult at times, but we want to make sure that our work has meaning, and we want to make sure that our work has purpose. And that purpose is to make sure that queer people of color and other communities who are sitting at the intersections between multiple marginalization can actually thrive in an organization, in a company, and in a society where whiteness still dominate. So our focus is very much on influencing change. How can we influence change? How can we create sustainable and meaningful systemic change that doesn't rely on one or two individuals, but it becomes an all organization's responsibility. It will take time, and we are still in the process of approaching people, working with organizations. And I keep saying to people, look, the way we do our work is we are influencing change one conversation at a time. So this is why I am delighted to be part of the HerStory Summit, because I think all of us who are in this room, we are committed to that change. We are committed to social justice, and we would like to move beyond diversity into equity and justice. And all of us can make change one conversation at a time. So that is my story in a nutshell. And feel free to ask me questions.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Now, you have spoken about impact of your intersectional identity on your sense of belonging in the LGBTQIA plus community. How did your experiences shape your understanding of diversity, equality, and inclusion?
It is such a good question, and also a very big question to answer as well, because I think in a Western country, we operate from the diversity lens. And diversity lens, in my view, is still very much on a very surface level acceptance. You know, if we have X amount of people of color, then we are diverse. But it doesn't actually speak to the concept of equity and justice. And I think all of us in this summit know what it meant. You know, when equity means that we actually allocate resources to people who have historically and systematically marginalized, and justice, where we actually prioritize the safety of people who are at the intersections instead of prioritizing the safety of people who are already part of the dominant group. So I think from my own experience of being a queer person of color, where there's a lot of intersections with my sexuality, gender, race, ethnicity, faith, and others, you know, when the community talking about diversity, that's not enough. We actually need to be part of the conversation, and we actually the one who needs to be put at the center to make sure that there is truly inclusive society. We can't say that we are being inclusive if we are deliberately creating barriers for people to be part of the conversation, to be part of the decision-making process, and to actually create that meaningful and sustainable change within and also outwards. So I think that's where my personal experience kicking in. You know, I keep saying to people, diversity is a good place to start, but let's not stop there. Let's keep moving and evolving.
Now, in your journey, you moved from academia into creating your own business. How did your studies in racial justice, feminism, and queer therapy influence your approach to the work that you do today?
I think that is one of the good things about being an arts graduate, that my first year of study, we were very much focused on feminism, and then we focused on social inequality and injustice. And that really speaks to what the company ethos is about. How can we address this, and how can we contribute to a movement that actually can make positive changes in society? So, I was born a male. I grew up in a patriarchal society, and I gained a lot of benefits for the simple fact that I was born a male. And I think feminism actually addressed that, and being influenced by the feminist critiques and theories make me realize of the privileges that I have that automatically granted to me. And queer theory that actually question even further this idea of sexuality and conformity, and why we need to address heterosexism and heteronormativity if we are going to create a more just society. So all of that are speaking to each other. And I like to draw a little bit in my work. I like to explain it in a lay term. When people hear theory or even feminism, some people really kind of distance themselves from that word. And I keep reminding people, all of us have been influenced by all these great thinkers, and especially intersectionality that comes from Black African American feminist movement, and how that actually manifests and evolve to address multiple marginalizations in many communities. So we all have to pay homage to the origin of where we get our knowledge from, and really do our best to actually address the essence of what they are trying to do. Um, Gender equity, racial justice, and intersectional lens to make sure that all people can actually be valued and embraced and bring their intersectional self without feeling that they need to filter one aspect of their identity in a way to feel a sense of belonging.
So you constantly highlight the importance of intersectionality and positionality in addressing systemic discrimination. Can you explain how these concepts influence the way that you work with organizations?
The way that I approach it's such a those two are very big concepts, and it can be a little bit overwhelming for some people who are new to these concepts. So the way I approach it is by doing a little bit of reflexive practice to start the day. I like to ask people, whether I'm doing public speaking or in the training, let's do a little bit of reflection, and let's identify where we have been positioned within the existing power structure. Yes, most of us have experienced discrimination, but we also carry privileges. And I like to bring myself, I like to use myself as an example. The marginalization that I experienced based on my sexuality, gender, race, ethnicity, and faith also coexist with my privilege of being born a male, of being able to speak English, coming from a middle class background that actually allowed me to be here in Australia through education and through professional and workplace, and also a lot of the other privileges that I carry with me. So when we being reflexive, when we come to terms with our own privilege and marginalization, that's where we can start switching the conversation into, if we, if us ourselves want to be valued and respected, then who else they are not sitting with us? Who else that we have been either subconsciously or systematically excluded simply because they do not share the same characteristics as us? And what can we do? If we don't want to be excluded ourselves, what can we do to bring these communities and individuals in? How can we value them? What needs to change within ourselves as well as the system in the organization? And I find that doing that reflexive practice is a good reminder to people that all these concepts are not just sitting outside of our body, it's actually within us. And when we realize that it is also within us, we are able to start making changes.
Now, you mentioned that biases are learned and reinforced subconsciously in daily interactions. What strategies do you use to challenge and disrupt these subconscious biases in organizations?
I think the first thing that we need to do is to name it. I think we are very scared of naming it because we operate on the perspective that we are good people and we like to do our best to do the right thing. But if we
Yes.
don't name it, then we don't address it. So we have to sit with that uncomfortableness. I carry my own biases. I carry biases because I'm a product of the product of society that I grew up in, and the product of society that I currently live in. And by naming it, we can actually start disrupting our own thoughts and our own behavior. So when we realize that is actually our perception about and based on biases and stereotypes that have been activated, then we can actually take a pause, that split second pause. Instead of reacting outwards, we can actually reacting inwards.
Mm.
Hang on a second. That's my biases kicking in. I
Mm.
identify it now. Now I need to start putting strategy in place so that biases don't become I don't react based on those biases.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in organization, it's very important to do that. I've been speaking a little bit about recruitment process. Companies and organizations keep telling us we do blind recruitment. And I kept saying to them, it is blind until they walk into the room and
Mm.
immediately your biases and your stereotypes
Oh,
kicking in. What can you do in that point onwards? So again, what we can do, name it, realize it, sit with it, address it, and willing to challenge it ourselves, to
yeah.
study, to listen, to expand our thinking. So slowly but surely our biases and stereotypes can start reduce reduce down.
So, diversity and inclusion efforts often fall short by addressing the power dynamics in organizations. How do you help companies recognize and shift these dynamics for meaningful change?
I have to be quite honest because quite often the people that can actually make that shift, they're not the one who's attending the training and the workshops. Those are the CEOs and the boards and the senior management team. The one that attending workshops, training, and even listening to programs like this are
Yeah.
usually middle management who are very keen to make changes, who are listening to their staff, but then they encounter barriers when they climb up the hierarchy. And we need to be very honest about it. I
Mm.
would love to see a master class where senior leadership and CEOs and the board are actually
Together.
we tell them,
Yeah.
we tell them straight up, you carry power, whether you like to believe it or not, that power comes with responsibility.
Mm.
I,
Mm.
I have known, I have been known of saying this in my public speaking and my workshops. In the Western lens, we see power as something to grab and hold on to. We don't see power as something to be shared. And if a company truly wants to be an equitable workplace, senior management, CEOs, and the board need to learn to share power. And in order to do that, they need to learn to be vulnerable and to be willing to accept criticism and to listen. So it is not about letting go, but it is about sharing. And once they are able to share the power and give decision making in to people who are diverse, who are intersectional, give them the
Mm.
opportunity to make decisions, to create meaningful change, and to be supported in the work that they do. That's where we're
Mhm.
going to start seeing real impact and real changes. The truth,
Mm.
we're not there yet. Let's be honest, we are not there yet. But all of us here collectively, we can keep knocking on that door. We can
Yeah.
keep asking for accountability, and I think there's power in a collective.
So, you've been working in this field for 7 to 8 years. What changes have you seen in the way that organizations approach intersectionality? And where do you feel the biggest gaps still lies or still exist?
I like to celebrate small changes. When I
Mm.
started 7 years ago, I approached people and they haven't even heard the word intersectionality. They thought it was new. And I said to them, actually, it's been going around in the 60s and 70s. It's just because it's a Black feminist movement, so people ignore it. And now it actually started to enter the vocabulary, even within government. So government documents and policies, they started using the word intersectionality. The
Mhm.
gap is, this is where the gap is some organizations simply replace the word diversity with the word intersectionality. And that is not
Very
the
different
way to
things.
go. Yeah. Copy and, find, select, delete, replace. Um, no, and this is where the gap is and where the work still needs to take place, is to actually guiding organization to truly understand the meaning of intersectionality, to truly unpack the compounding impact of experiencing intersecting marginalization and
Yeah.
how workplaces can be a source of harm for people who are intersectional. And once they're willing to see that and to face the truth, that's where we can start making changes. If the
Mhm.
organization is the place of harm, what needs to change? Let's start looking at the policies. Let's start looking at the environment. Let's start looking about the grievance process, the recruitment, the leadership. So we start slowly getting there, especially here in Australia, where conversation about racial justice is a little bit slower than in the United States. But hey, we're just going to keep doing it because if we don't do it, there's no changes.
So your work focuses on ensuring marginalized communities receive the same starting point in organizations as those with existing privileges. What practical steps can companies take to achieve this kind of equity?
The first thing that companies can take is actually realizing why it can be difficult for people who are intersectional to actually apply for a position and start unpacking that when you're experiencing racism, homophobia, sexism, ableism, and a lot more, it can actually create a barrier for people to even put in a resume. It creates barriers for people to put their hands up, and also it can actually deter people from applying to an organization that they are perceived as not safe to them.
Mm.
Once company realize that it is not that people do not want to work with us, but there are a lot of that systemic barriers that they are experiencing, companies can actually start doing the groundwork of approaching individuals, telling them we recognize your talent, we recognize your skills. We know based on your intersecting identities that access to education may not be there, that access to promotion might have been taken away from you. We know
Mm.
that, and we really want to work with you. How can we create a mentorship program? Would you like to be mentored with us? Would you like to be sitting with us, gaining some experience to uplift your skills, your
Yes.
confidence? So then when the opportunity comes, you can apply to for the position. So for a company to do it practically, they actually need to step back. They need to look into all these gaps and barriers, and they need to start addressing it by giving opportunity.
To this.
Why
Wow.
companies, yeah, and for me, why companies haven't done it is because they don't want to be seen as giving preferential treatment.
Mm.
Well, guess what? Professional treatment already happens. In a white dominated society, it's already happening. So it is not about preferential treatment, it is about equity. And they just have to keep using that line whenever they face criticism.
Mm.
Equity is about human rights. So let's do it.
So, what role does emotional intelligence play in your work? particularly in addressing power imbalances and biases within leadership teams?
We can't have leadership without emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, in my view, is the ability for us not only to understand our own emotions, but also to build empathy. And empathy can lead to respect, understanding, but also a greater appreciation of what someone can bring to the organization.
Mm.
So think this is again another missing piece in the existing leadership program or leadership characteristic. We don't really talk about emotional intelligence. You know, some leaders see emotional intelligence as something that is a little bit too left field for them.
Mm.
You can't. To be a leader, you need to know how you react when your staff are expressing grievances. You need to be
Mm.
aware, you need to be attuned with your own emotions. You need to understand the value that you bring and
Yeah,
staying true to that value. And more importantly, you need to be brave and you need to be courageous and you need to set examples. And that requires emotional intelligence.
yeah.
Without it, we, we
We're
find
not
ourselves where we are now.
We're in a lot of trouble. So, you've spoken about the importance of the collective effort in creating systemic change. How do you foster a sense of community and collaboration within the organizations that you work with?
It's about that community of practice. It's about getting people with the shared values and shared vision together. And it's about encouraging professional networks so they are supporting each other. Um, I think professional network has been slightly hijacked by the power system to be just a gathering of people to talk
Yeah.
about things, but actually don't come up with any solution. And I think we need to revisit that and we need to say to the power, hang on a second, no, that's not what professional network is about. Professional network is about us supporting each other, share our experiences, and troubleshoot problems together. Of course, power doesn't like that because that means they will be held accountable. But we actually need to do that. And, you know, this is why I'm so delighted to be part of this Her Story Summit because we are part of that collective. We are part of that professional network. We are supporting each other and we are holding power accountable as much as we are being held accountable by our peers. So that reflexive practice coming back again.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with a colleague based in Germany the other day who was struggling with, creating the space, the means for these collaborative experiences to happen and, building a sense of community in the police force. And I suggested to him that maybe on, I don't know, any international day, they could introduce a day where people bring foods from different countries and they share food. In Zimbabwe, we have a saying or a quote that says, "Ukama igasha rinosungwa nechikafu," which means relationships are like fabric that is bound together with the breaking of bread. So we actually believe in Zimbabwe, unless somebody has invited you to their home and you sat down and had a meal with them, a home cooked meal, you're not really friends. So friendships can be fostered around things like food. It's not confronting. You're sharing culture, you're sharing your experiences of how the food is made traditionally. So I'm hoping that he's going to take that up as a way to start creating this sense of community within his organization as well.
Absolutely. And I love that, Gertrude. And for me, I would like to take it one step further, not just about the food, but like you said, the story behind the food, the,
Yes.
the meaning, the cultural meaning behind it. Because I think once we unpack that a bit deeper, we can actually start seeing connections
Yeah.
and connections.
Similarities and not differences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, looking ahead, this is my last question for you. Looking ahead, what is your vision for how intersectionality, equity, and justice can be embedded more deeply into corporate and societal structures? And what will it take to get there?
I would love to see it as part of a standing agenda. So in any KPIs, any program design, strategic planning, the standing agenda is how can we practice equity? And when it becomes a standing agenda, that's where we can start seeing meaningful change. At the moment, it is not a standing agenda. At the moment, equity and justice and intersectionality is at the mercy of who holds leadership at the time. So I would like organizations to be brave and to say, we cannot preach inclusion. We cannot say that we practice equity if we keep equity, justice, and intersectionality as an addition. It's actually core to our business. It is essential for our staff. It is important for our clients and consumers, and we're going to keep doing it. We are not going to get it right all the time, but we are going to keep doing it because the behind that, our commitment is towards human rights. If anyone would like to challenge human rights, I mean, feel free to do that. There will be a lot of letters and emails and phone calls made to you. But let's just keep that as the foundation. If we truly believe in human rights as our value, then we have to put this at the center and we have to put it as a standing item and keep doing it.
Oh, wow. Budi, thank you so much. I could talk to you forever on this subject, and I can see you're so well versed with coming up with the solutions that the corporate world is looking for. Please do not tire. Keep on keeping on. This work is needed in any organization, and it's just been an absolute honor for me to be able to share you with our community as well. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. The Her Story Circle is a social impact movement. We bring you the stories and voices of people from all over the world to uplift you, inspire you, energize you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you want to go. So tune in again tomorrow when we have yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.